This is The Chris Berry Show. Expert information on wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
Welcome to the show. We're going to start this week like we do every week of The Chris Berry Show with a positive focus, something positive that happened within this last week. And I have two things to share, both of them family related. So I have two children, my son Ryan, who's age 8, and my daughter Madison, who's age 6. And it was so cute the other day. It was just one of those kind of proud father moments where I was tucking my daughter into bed, and we kind of always have the same routine. But as we're going through the routine, she asked me, "Dad, I want to have synesthesia," which is hard enough for me to pronounce, let alone hearing it come from my 6-year-old, synesthesia. And I kind of looked at her. I'm like, "Madison, what?" She's like, "Synesthesia," as if I should know just like obviously what that is. And I'd ask you, the listeners of the show, do you know what synesthesia is off the top of your head? But I didn't. So I said, "Maddie, I'm not sure I'm understanding you." And I wasn't sure if she was mispronouncing something or just something I didn't know. So I asked her to describe it. And I love the way that her little 6-year-old mind looked for ways to describe something, a word. And so she described it as, she's like, "Dad, it's when you see colors when music is playing." So it's actually a thing. And when she said that, it reminded me, and I had to double check to make sure that it was right. But so my daughter wants to have synesthesia because she said it sounds fun. So that was kind of interesting when my children start hitting me with words that throw me for a loop, and I have to rely on the old Google to get the answer to something like that. And then I just thought it was funny that she's hitting me with these like scientific words. And this past week they attended science camp at Cranbrook in Bloomfield Hills. So they go every summer, and they really enjoy themselves at science camp, where every day they're kind of learning something new, and maybe they're learning about synesthesia. So that's the word for the day. And maybe we should go back to having a word of the day on the Chris Berry Show. I remember growing up, I used to watch some television shows like Sesame Street, and I'm going to admit it, Pee-wee's Playhouse, but they'd have a word of the day. So the word of the day today is synesthesia. So if you don't know what that one is, you can look it up for the spelling. I had to look it up and confirm that, yes, my 6-year-old does know some things that I don't, being over the age of 40 now. So that was kind of interesting. It was just a proud parent moment of just loving how they're continually learning. So this week on the show, what we're going to do is we're going to take some news articles that are floating around in the news cycle right now, and a couple articles I read this week, couple facts I want to share and talk about how that applies to you. And probably the biggest thing, or the biggest piece of news, is that the biggest piece of news is probably that Secure Act. So the Secure Act, which, again, if you remember, and we've talked about it previously on the show, was Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement Act. So that's what the acronym actually stands for, but it sounds silly. And the actual act is silly compared to what the title of the act is. So again, this is called the Secure Act, and it passed the House recently, 417 to 3. And I always wonder what the other 3 people were thinking. Like, you have 417 people on one side, 3 people on the other side. What were they holding back? Or what was the stumbling block for them to get on board with it? And I could think of a couple things, because from a public standpoint, while they're calling this the Secure Act, I really think that this act is a little bit of a Trojan horse, where they're trying to pull the wool over us as taxpayers. And I'll talk about why. But we have the Secure Act coming. And it's not a law yet, but it sounds like, and I might be wrong on this, but the rumors are that this might be signed into law within the next month or so. But it hasn't passed yet. And so what the Secure Act really is talking about is a couple things, a couple big things that are sticking out in this act. So why they're pitching this and why they're trying to play this off as a positive for the public is that one of the big parts of the Secure Act is that they're pushing back the required minimum distributions from age 70 and a half to 72. So what that means is right now, when you turn 70 and a half, any pre-tax dollars inside of 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, unless you're still at the employer, there's certain exceptions, but for a majority of us, once you turn 70 and a half, whether you like it or not, you have to start taking out required minimum distributions. So right now, if you have an IRA, let's say you have $500,000 in your IRA, at 70 and a half, you're going to have to take out 3.65% and pay the tax, whether you like it or not. And that percentage goes up every year, and it's on an actual table that basically runs out at age 115. So if you have IRA money, and if you just take out the RMD each year, basically you would have closed out that IRA and paid all the income tax by age 115. And so what the Secure Act is doing is talking about pushing back that RMD age until 72. So I like this for two reasons. One, it gets rid of the confusion of the 70 and a half. Like, what do I do? Do I have to take it out by the time I turn 71, or do I have until the next year? People get confused about that 70 and a half, and I question why they came up with that number in the first place. And so it gets rid of some confusion. And then the second reason why I like this is that what it's doing is expanding that area where you have free reign with regards to your tax-deferred accounts. So if you're to take the money out of your tax-deferred IRA or 401k, unless you have an exception prior to 59 and a half, you're going to pay a 10% penalty. And then if you forget or choose not to take out our RMD after age 70 and a half, which now will be 72, you'll pay a 50% penalty on top of having to pay any tax. So now that sweet spot as it relates to planning or really having full access to without restrictions and without being told that you have to take the money out, it expands that sweet spot from 59 and a half to 70 now to, or 59 and a half to 70 and a half. Now it expands it to 59 and a half to 72. And so what that means is it just gives us a little more space to do some of the creative planning. And there's some nifty things that we can do between that 59 and a half and 70 and a half, which now will be 72, as it relates to tax-deferred accounts. Because a lot of the public has been sold on this idea of deferring paying taxes as long as possible. And all you're doing by doing that is you're creating a bigger tax burden. So there's some strategies, and this is one of the things that we're talking about in our upcoming workshops. We have a workshop coming up in Howell at Cleary University coming up where we're talking about living a tax-free retirement, trying to get to the most tax-efficient retirements possible. And you can get some information on those workshops. We have two, one on Social Security optimization, as well as another one on living a tax-free retirement. You can get that information by going to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, and we'll have a link to click through to attend one of those free workshops at Cleary University in Howell. But again, we're going to be talking about living a tax-free retirement and Social Security timing, which are both important aspects. So getting back to that Secure Act, which again is laughably is called, it stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement Act. So the nice part of it is that it is allowing individuals to delay taking their required minimum distributions to 70 and a half, or to 72 instead of 70 and a half. So that's nice. That's the bonus. One of the lesser talked about aspects of the Secure Act is that it is allowing inside of employer-sponsored plans, so inside of things like 401ks, allows for the use of annuities inside of 401ks. My view of this is it could be a good or a bad thing, and it really depends on where you're getting advice from. So as they open up 401ks to have annuities housed inside of them, my only concern with that is just making sure that individuals are getting good advice, getting good best interest advice on their investments. Because one of the concerns is that there's different levels of suitability, which can be surprising for a lot of individuals when they're working with a financial professional. Because there's individuals who are, say, insurance licensed, who can sell annuities and life insurance, and all they have is what's called a suitability standard versus really a true financial professional, true counselor should have a best interest or a true fiduciary relationship, which I do, obviously, as a practicing attorney. I owe attorney-client privilege to my clients. And then I also do owe a fiduciary interest in serving my clients versus a lot of financial professionals just have what's called a suitability standard. So a good difference or way to understand the difference between a true fiduciary versus suitability would be if you were to walk into a butcher shop, they're going to sell you a piece of meat that's not rancid. So that means it's suitable for you. Versus my role as a fiduciary is to say, you know what, maybe you shouldn't walk into that butcher shop. Maybe you should go get a salad. So it's more of like a dietitian. So my one concern with allowing 401ks to be opened up to allow annuities inside of them is that now all of these insurance salesmen who are just selling annuities and selling life insurance versus really having a true plan, a holistic plan for clients, they're going to be shooting fish in the barrel where now they're going to have more opportunities to sell insurance products to individuals who, while it might be suitable for them, it might not be in their best interests. So that's my one concern with allowing annuities inside of 401ks. Is I just want to make sure that people are getting advice from true fiduciaries versus just insurance salesmen. Because if you go to an annuity salesman, all they're going to do is sell you an annuity that's suitable for you versus maybe an annuity isn't right for you. There's a big difference, and there's a lot of confusion around that concept. And with the Secure Act allowing annuities to be part of 401ks, I just want to make sure that the public's getting good advice with regards to that. So those are two maybe good things for the public, for taxpayers. But now this is where I view the Secure Act as a little bit of a Trojan horse because I think this next concept is why politicians are pushing the Secure Act. And again, we've talked about it previously, but I think it's important to drive home because this is something that I see could be turned into law within the next year. And as I'm sitting down with clients, it's one of the things that we're talking to them about is that if the Secure Act does pass, what are the ramifications from a legal standpoint, a financial standpoint, a tax standpoint? So here's kind of the Trojan horse part of the Secure Act, why I think the politicians actually passed this bill. So what they're doing is, along with what I've already talked about, one of the things that they've included in this bill that's not getting enough publicity is that they're limiting the stretch of IRAs for the next generation. So let's walk through this a little bit. So you know right now that when you turn 70 and a half, you have to start taking out required minimum distributions. Well, what happens when you pass away? Well, typically you'll name your spouse as a primary beneficiary, so that IRA now becomes the surviving spouse's. But then when that surviving spouse passes away and you leave it to the next generation does not have to pay all the tax at once. So let's say you're leaving a $500,000 IRA to your children. They wouldn't have to pay all the income tax all in 1 year. One of the things they have is the ability to stretch out the IRA over their lifetime and pay the tax over time versus paying the tax all in 1 year. Now, why does this become an issue? Well, by allowing children to stretch out that IRA, they're minimizing the taxes. So let's say if you were to take out your required minimum distributions at 70 and a half, well, if someone to inherit an IRA at, say, age 40, they might only have to take out 2%, meaning they could stretch it out over their lifetime. Now, the issue is with the Secure Act, what the politicians have done is they've said they're going to put a limit on how long individuals can stretch it out. Inherited IRAs can be stretched out. So they're saying that you can only stretch out the IRA up to 10 years. So what that's going to do is that's going to really close that window on being able to stretch out IRAs for the next generation. And that's going to lead to less flexibility and more possibly tax being paid, because now instead of stretching out over 10 years, your beneficiaries will have to pay the income tax within 10 years. So let's say we have a $500,000 IRA and a child inherits that. They don't have to pay the tax all at once. They could stretch out that tax burden over their lifetime. Versus now, at the very best they can hope for is to take out $100,000 a year, which is ordinary income on top of whatever other income they're already earning, and they'd have to pay the tax, which in the end would raise their marginal tax rate, which in the end is going to raise more tax dollars for the government. So it's kind of sneaky how they did this. And from a politician standpoint, if I was a devious politician, this would make me so happy, because in essence, I'm raising additional tax dollars without raising taxes. So you're going to have politicians saying that they didn't raise taxes, but they voted for this act, when in essence, that's what they're doing, is they're raising taxes on the beneficiaries, because they're limiting the stretch out. They're saying if you have a $500,000 IRA that you inherit, and instead of being able to stretch that out over your whole lifetime, you have to pay all the income tax within 10 years. So they've basically compressed that window for paying taxes. And it's a way for them to generate more tax revenue upon death of an individual, and basically call those taxes earlier rather than later, so that they can get that tax money sooner rather than later. It's almost like you have a loan and they're calling your loan early. And in our next segment, we're going to talk about some of the ramifications that this new bill has in terms of planning. And then we're going to get into some of the other issues, some other news items that I saw come across this past week that I think is important to bring up to talk about when we plan on talking about planning, legal, financial, and tax planning for the second half of life. So stick with us as we continue this conversation, talking about the ramifications of the Secure Act and talking about some additional topics.
Certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton can help you protect your assets from the cost of long-term care, and they can also help you with estate planning, like they did for Linda Emerson.
I had to redo my will. It weighed on me that I hadn't changed it. I wanted to make everything easy for my daughter whenever I do keel over. But I went in, it was very professional, and sat down with Chris. I would definitely suggest him because he knows his stuff and he's not aggressive. He's, very friendly and makes you feel comfortable, because I think he realizes it's not a comfortable thing for people. It was just an easy process. I came out of it and I told my daughter, "It's all yours, kiddo."
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800, 810-214-3800.
So previously, we were just talking about the Secure Act, which again, the Secure Act stands for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement Act, but we know that there's more to the act than just what's best for the taxpayer. We know that this is really a little bit of a money grab by our politicians to limit the stretch of the IRA. So it's something we're tracking, and again, I think it's a bill that will pass, and it could pass as soon as the next month or so. Again, it got through the House 417-3. So it has more than bipartisan support. It has basically support of all of the politicians. And again, the big things, the positive is that it is allowing us to push back those RMDs from 70.5 to 72. And that's going to allow some planning strategies. And kind of the big downside of the act is that it's going to basically be the death knell of the stretch IRA, only allowing beneficiaries to stretch out those IRAs for up to 10 years. So what does this mean? And I was having a talk with my team actually this past week, and we're talking about whenever you're learning something or reading or attending a continued education, one side of it is take notes on what this is all about, but then really the more important thing is what action steps should we take? How do we act on the knowledge? Because knowledge just by itself, it's worthless. We need to take action on this. So what are the things with the Secure Act coming down the pike that we should be thinking about? Well, I think one of the biggest strategies, and this is a drum we've been banging for a while now, is looking at paying the taxes sooner rather than later. So now it's given us some more flexibility in that sweet spot between 59.5 and 72 if the bill does go through, all the way through. Because that's the time that we can pull from our tax-deferred accounts, the IRAs, the 401ks, et cetera. We can pull from it not tax-free. I wish it was tax-free. It's just penalty-free. We can pull penalty-free from 59.5 to 70.5. And this is something that we talk about in one of our upcoming workshops, Living a Tax-Free Retirement, which you can get some more information by going to thechrisberryshow.com. And we're going to have that coming up in Howell at Cleary University. But the idea is that let's look at how kind of retirement plays out. So it's looking at maybe alternative ways, not just feeding into what we're sold by the government and kind of mainstream media, but looking at alternative strategies as it relates to maximizing our retirement dollars. So one of the ideas is to, and this becomes even more prevalent or more emphasized with the Secure Act because it's really putting a limitation on inherited IRAs and allowing us more flexibility as it relates to our own planning, is that let's look at from the time that we retire, whether it's 62, 65, 67, maybe we start pulling money from the tax-deferred accounts while still allowing our Social Security to grow. So let's say you retire at age 62. Now, you're not forced to take Social Security right when you retire. The concept of retirement and Social Security, unlike what the government has told us, those concepts aren't married together. We don't have to take Social Security right when we retire. So what we might want to do is allow our Social Security to grow because it grows at 8% a year, basically guaranteed, where nowhere else in the environment and the investing in world can you get a guaranteed 8% raise. So if we delay taking Social Security, then we allow our Social Security to grow so that at age 70, it's 132% of what it normally would be at full retirement age, which is 66 or 67. So we allow this guaranteed income stream to grow. And then the question is, how do we cover our income gap? How do we cover our expenses from the time that we retire until age 70 when we claim Social Security? And this is where we rely on maybe those large tax-deferred accounts, the IRAs, the 401ks. We rely on our assets to cover that income gap because A, that allows our Social Security to continue to grow, and then B, it diffuses that ticking tax time bomb that's going to hit us at 70.5 or now 72 if the Secure Act passes. Because once you reach 70.5 or 72 with the Secure Act, then you're forced to take out your required minimum distributions, which are taxed at ordinary income tax rates. So you couple that with Social Security and a pension, and all of a sudden you might be in a higher tax bracket in retirement than you were when you were working. So with the Secure Act, one thing is that maybe because now we have more space to pull out money from those tax-deferred accounts, we can get into a more tax-efficient retirement. So that's one reason to, again, with the Secure Act, maybe pay the tax on those tax-deferred accounts sooner rather than later. Now we just have some more space with the Secure Act on when we pay the tax bill. So instead of being forced to take it out at 70.5, we can stretch out that tax-efficient retirement planning strategy of a couple more years before we're forced to take out those required minimum distributions. So that puts more emphasis, again, on just that overall strategy that we've been kind of banging the drum on quite a bit here of paying the taxes sooner rather than later. And then the second reason why, with the Secure Act, it puts more emphasis on paying the taxes sooner rather than later is that because now the stretch is limited to only 10 years. So I have, in the past, a lot of clients who are engaging in a strategy of leaving tax-deferred dollars to their beneficiaries and putting it in a trust that would stretch out the payments of those required minimum distributions over a lifetime, really to create almost a pension for the beneficiaries. especially since pensions are going away. Well, we can still do that. We can still create these pensions, but now understand that with the Secure Act, we have to pay all the income tax within 10 years. So it puts more emphasis on if you are looking at that legacy planning, which again is one of the 5 pieces of a sound retirement game plan, legacy planning, tax planning, investment planning, income planning, healthcare planning. But if you are looking at legacy planning and tax planning, maybe it makes more sense if you're looking to leave a legacy to your beneficiaries, to leave more bang for your buck. Maybe you pay the tax sooner rather than later and leave them maybe tax-free money or taxable money. Maybe look at pulling the money out of those tax-deferred accounts and putting it into a permanent life insurance policy. So now instead of leaving your beneficiaries money that's going to be taxed and has to be taxed over the next 10 years, hiking up their marginal income tax rates, probably at the time that they're the highest income earners, instead of leaving them that tax-deferred money, that money that's still in a partnership with the U.S. government, maybe you look at paying the taxes sooner rather than later, and then as you pay the tax, you have a choice of how you want to leave that investment to that next generation. Okay, so you pay the income tax on the IRA, you pull it out, and then maybe you look at doing a Roth conversion. So now you're leaving money that's tax-free to the next generation, so that when they inherit this money, they don't have to worry about paying all the income taxes within 10 years because the tax has already been paid. Or another option is looking at leaving it using life insurance. Now, a lot of people only think about term life insurance, but there's also permanent life insurance strategies where you can pay the insurance, pay the premiums now, or pay the income tax on the IRAs, pull out those RMDs, or even if you're not taking RMDs, take out some of that money from the IRAs, pay the income tax now, and that could go to fund a life insurance policy that could really leave more bang for the buck for the next generation. So, because if you were a beneficiary and you were to inherit, say, $100,000 of pre-tax IRA money, or $100,000 of Roth, which can grow tax-free, or $100,000 of life insurance, which you inherit tax-free, what makes more sense from a legacy planning standpoint? So that's just 2 potential kind of reasons why we might want to look at paying the tax sooner rather than later with the Secure Act going through. One, it gives us more space to pay the tax without worrying about any type of penalties or forced to take out any RMDs. So now instead of 59.5 to 70.5, we have 59.5 to 72 as our window of opportunity where we can pull money out of our tax-deferred accounts without worrying about any type of penalty, and we're not forced to. So that's really our sweet spot where we really have control of these tax-deferred accounts. And then the second reason why we should look at a strategy of paying the tax sooner rather than later is that now when we're leaving these tax-deferred accounts to our beneficiaries, they're going to get walloped with ordinary income tax because now they're going to have to pay all the income tax on those IRAs, on those 401ks, on those 403bs. Instead of being able to stretch it out over their lifetime, they're going to be able to, or they're going to be forced to pay the income tax within 10 years. So a couple things to think about with that Secure Act moving forward is, okay, now might really be the time, along with all the other reasons we've cited, of looking at paying the tax sooner rather than later, getting your money out of that partnership with the U.S. government. And some of the other things that we've talked about previously on the show is that taxes are going up in the future. In 2025, if you're at the 12% tax bracket now, most likely that's going to be 15%. If you're paying a 22% marginal tax rate now, that's going to be 25% in 2025. So we know taxes are going to go up in the future. That's the way the current law is structured, let alone whatever happens in 2020. What if we have a change in presidency? What if the other party gets into office? Do we think that the other side is going to raise taxes? Most likely, yeah. So given that, doesn't it make sense to pay the tax sooner rather than later? And then you add on the fact that we're $22 trillion in debt, and that's just going up every minute. In fact, if you want to check on what the U.S. debt is, you can go to usdebtclock.org that keeps a running tally of just how much debt this country is maintaining. So with these kind of different ideas, and especially now with the Secure Act, it's really putting an emphasis on paying the taxes sooner rather than later. And a part of me thinks that this was the plan all along, because it certainly makes sense from a political standpoint, is we're sold on this idea of defer, paying taxes as long as possible. Put as much money into your 401ks, overfund your 401ks over and above the match so you can defer paying taxes as long as possible. Isn't this what we're kind of sold on this idea of throwing as much into the 401k as possible? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it seems, they're not going to raise the taxes on us because no one would vote for a politician that would be doing that. But what they're doing is they're raising the taxes on our beneficiaries, on our next generation, which in one of the articles we're going to talk about today is that this next generation, especially the millennials, they're counting on some big inheritance. That's probably not the case for a variety of factors. But now on top of that, not only are they probably getting less of an inheritance, and we'll talk about why in our next segment, but now they're going to probably have to pay more of a tax on that inheritance, especially for those tax-deferred dollars that we're leaving to them. So again, I think it's a devious ploy by the government. But if I was a politician and looking to raise funds to cover this debt that we have and all the other things going on, it's a way that now the politician can go back to their constituents and say, hey, I didn't raise taxes on you. It's not a tax raise. But in essence, if you look at the deferral as a loan, they're calling the loan earlier on those beneficiaries. So what can we do about it? Well, I don't think we can really change anything in Congress since it's already passed the Congress 417-3. But now we can look at some strategies as an individual to make sure that you have a tax plan moving forward, that you have an idea of how you're going to cover taxes in the future. So it's not enough to have someone helping you with tax preparation, but you really need to have a tax plan. And that's one of the things that we focus on. We think that there's 5 main concepts or plans that we have to have in retirement as we're planning for the second half of life to really make sure that we have a sound retirement game plan. And so tax planning is a big piece of that, and that's something that we can control. And when we're talking about tax planning, I'm not just talking about going to H&R Block and having tax preparation for your last year. That's just looking historically. Really what I'm talking about is looking forward over the next 5 years, the next 10 years, looking at what you're leaving to your kids and beneficiaries, having a plan for how are you going to manage taxes. Because just buying into the government's program, a defer, you see what happens. You see that now our beneficiaries are going to pay more taxes than probably we intended. As we see people in retirement where they haven't done any tax planning, they see that a majority of their wealth is wrapped up in these IRAs, and then they get to 70 and a half, and all of a sudden they're facing what Ed Slott, who's really an expert, maybe you've seen him on NPR or something like that, or PBS. Ed Slott calls it the retirement savings tax time bomb, where you built up all this net worth inside of an IRA. You like seeing that big number there, but understand that money isn't yours. You have a tax liability there. You're still in partnership with the U.S. government. And you need to devise a way to get out of that out of that partnership with the U.S. government. So you need to figure out a way to diffuse that ticking tax time bomb that hits you at 70 and a half or now 72 under the Secure Act. And then even if you're over 70 and a half and you're paying RMDs now, it still probably makes sense to have some sort of tax plan moving forward. Because just looking at what we call bracket bumping is an easy concept where you look to see how much money you could pull from your tax-deferred accounts, your IRAs, your 401ks, before you get into the next tax bracket. So if there's $20,000 that you could pull from your IRA before you go up until from the 12 to the 22% tax bracket, maybe it makes sense to explore that. And that's probably not something that your H&R Block tax preparation person is going to really help you with. That's really developing a tax plan. And that's one of the focuses we have at our firm of the 5 pieces of a sound retirement game plan. Having a tax plan, a legacy plan, a healthcare plan, an income plan, investment plan. Really, all these pieces need to work together. Now, stick with us as we continue this conversation of talking about tax-deferred accounts and some things that have happened in the news cycle this past week.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm, like Jennifer did from Howell.
This past summer, my mom had to transition into a nursing home. So we contacted Chris to help get things in order. You know, I wanted the best. I wanted somebody who knew what they were doing. Chris was able to help save a lot of that money that my mom and dad both worked so hard for. I thought that everything would have to go to the nursing home, but it didn't. He was able to save us half of everything that would have gone if we hadn't contacted the Elder Care Firm. And we're all happy about that. Don't go to the nursing home without contacting Chris first.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800. 810-214-3800.
So we've been talking about the Secure Act and just some of the things going on in the news cycle right now. And there's some interesting articles I wanted to bring up. And the first one was titled Retirement Savers Check Your 401k Math. And this is from the Wall Street Journal, June 8th and 9th. So just recently, within last month. And really what it's talking about is the idea that we've already been talking about of whether you want to pay your taxes now or you pay your taxes later. I thought this article was interesting because very seldom do you see an article that asks you to examine if it is a good idea to contribute to a 401k, or would you better off be contributing to a Roth 401k? And this is something, especially with our younger savers, that I always bring up, that if you are working right now, one of the things to explore is whether your company offers a Roth 401k option. So, and this is becoming more prevalent. And the difference between these, they're both employer-sponsored plans, so you're limited to just the choices of that employer in terms of what they offer inside of that 401k. But what a Roth is, a Roth 401k, it's offered by the employer, but you're putting in after-tax dollars that grows tax-free versus your Roth 401k, which is pre-tax dollars that grows tax-deferred. And again, as we're having this conversation about the Secure Act and taxes going up in the future, the question is, do you want to be taxed on the seed or the harvest? And I don't see a lot of articles talking about this concept. So this is why it really kind of stuck out to me, is because this is kind of the alternative thinking these days, because the government and a lot of mainstream media says fund your 401k, defer as long as possible. But the questions I would ask is, do you think it's probable that taxes will be higher in the future with all of the additional revenue we will need for the government? Would your money grow better with 30 to 40 years of tax-free compounding or 30 to 40 years of tax-deferred compounding? Again, do you want to be taxed on the seed or the harvest? Personally, I think it's a pretty easy question to answer. If taxes are historically low right now, wouldn't it be the smart play to pay the taxes sooner rather than later and put your money into vehicles that the government will never be able to tax again? And so things like that would be looking at the Roth 401k option. So see if your employer offers a Roth 401k option. Now, understand that if there is an employer match, that the match will have to go into the tax-deferred side. But still, I would put my contribution into the Roth side with the match going into the 401k side. I'd do that all day versus my contribution and the match going into that 401k side. Because all you're doing is you're creating more of a tax liability in the future. And again, if we think taxes are going up in the future, which a lot of experts do, and in fact, that's the way the tax law is currently written, then I would pay the tax sooner rather than later. And so I thought it was great to see an article, especially in the Wall Street Journal, talking about this idea of looking at tax-free alternatives. Is it better to put it in a Roth 401k or a traditional 401k? And then I would add on one more piece to that puzzle. So I would look at it as, do I want Roth 401k? Do I want traditional 401k? Or let's kind of add an advanced level to this planning. And again, this is something as a truly holistic planner where we're looking at the whole picture. We're able to look at strategies such as this. But instead of contributing or overfunding a 401k or overfunding that Roth 401k, I always say you take the employee match. We talked about the order of money before. The best type of money is free money. So if the employer is offering a match, you always want to take that match. Now, what I'm suggesting is you contribute to that 401k up to whatever they match, and then the match, they have to throw that into the traditional 401k side. But typically, I would not recommend putting in more than whatever the company is matching. I would look at other alternatives, whether you're opening up your own Roth IRA, you could look at an IRA, you could look at just a taxable accounts. You could look at things like health savings accounts, 529s. But one thing that a lot of my clients, once they truly understand how it works, they're liking the idea of what's called permanent life insurance, more specifically index universal life insurance. So some of the advantages of index universal life insurance is that you can contribute to this and it grows tax-free. And it's tied to the index. So if the market goes up, you participate in the upside of the market. If the market goes down, you don't lose anything. Plus, it's liquid. So unlike 401ks or IRAs, there's no limitations on when you pull the money out of index universal life insurance. So you can contribute to it over a period of time, and then you can pull that money out prior to 59 and a half. And there's no limitations on what you can use the money for. Unlike, say, a health savings account or a 529, health savings account does grow tax-free, but you have to use it for healthcare costs. 529 does grow tax-free, but you have to use it for medical costs. With an index universal life insurance policy, it's almost like a Swiss Army knife in that the money grows tax-free, and you can use it for really any purpose. And also, now taking this a step further, one of the nice things about an index universal life versus a Roth or a traditional 401k or IRA is that the money that you're saving can be protected inside of an asset protection trust. So if you're concerned about lawsuits or long-term care costs in the future, one of the things you can do is you can use index universal life insurance as an investment product inside of an asset protection trust, like a Castle Trust, which, unlike any other type of qualified accounts like a 401k or a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA or an IRA, those you have to be the owner. And what that means is from a Medicaid or long-term care planning standpoint, those are countable assets. So if you were to go into a nursing home, those are things that they're going to look at that you're going to have to spend down versus assets that have been inside of an asset protection trust for 5 years, because Medicaid has a 5-year look-back period. Everything inside of that trust can grow and be protected. And so a lot of times when I'm sitting down with clients and talking to them about setting up an asset protection trust to cover that healthcare planning, that long-term care planning, that legacy planning, they're asking, well, can I put my Roth or can I put my IRA or can I put my 401k into the trust? And the answer is no, because those are qualified accounts. And so if we're looking at a type of asset that can grow tax-free inside of an asset protection trust, so it's protected, we can't use a Roth. We can't use a 529. We can't use a HSA. That's where we have to use an index universal life insurance policy or a permanent cash value life insurance, which can be owned by the trust, which means it's protected, and it can grow tax-free. And it's tied to the index. So we're participating in the upside of the market without having to worry about the downturn of the market. So it's just taking that article that talked about the difference between a Roth versus a traditional 401k. But I would add just one more investment idea to that. So I would look at, does it make sense to have a 401k or IRA? Does it make sense to have a Roth 401k or Roth IRA? Or does it make sense to have an index universal life? And for most people, the answer is a mix or a combination of all of those. So I'm a big believer in understanding these tools and then using the tool that's right for you. And with this radio program, again, understand we're just giving general advice. This doesn't apply necessarily to everyone. My goal with this is to provide some ideas, provide some education, and then if you do want to see how this information applies to you, we have workshops going on weekly at one of our different locations. And you can go to thechrisberryshow.com to see a list of our upcoming workshops where we talk about tax planning and minimizing taxes in retirement. And we talk about a lot of times the order of money, of understanding that really there's kind of four concepts with money. One is free money, money you get from your employer. That's the best type of money. Then we have tax deferred, or then we have tax-free money. That's things like Roths and Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, HSAs, Index Universal Life, 529s. Then we have taxable money. That's money sitting in your checking account or savings account, probably not growing that much. But if you have it in brokerage accounts, that's money that you have to pay tax on the gains. It would be taxed at capital gains. And then we have our tax-deferred money. That's money that you haven't paid any income tax, and when you pull that money out, you have to pay that ordinary income tax rate. So we're big believers in diversity in terms of your investments as well as tax diversity. You shouldn't have all your money sitting in those tax-deferred accounts because things like the Secure Act can hit us and hit our beneficiaries, where this money that we're in partnership with U.S. government, because we're in partnership, they can still mess with us. They can still change the rules on us versus money that's say, an Index Universal Life or in a Roth. We've already paid the tax. It can't be taxed again. So that's something that I saw in the Wall Street Journal. I thought it was interesting to bring up. Again, the title of that article is Retirement Savers, Check Your 401k Math. So the next article I read was entitled What You Need to Know About Capital Gains Taxes But Probably Don't. And again, this is from the Wall Street Journal. This is from June 16th, 2019. And part of it was actually something coming from the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum just provided the results of a study which concluded that most retirees on our planet will run out of income 10 years before they die. So in the study, in the United States, the study concluded that men run out of income 8 years before they die, and women run out of income almost 11 years before they die. So the scary thing here is that not enough people really have a true income plan, that they don't have money that's going to last a lifetime. And this is especially concerning depending on how the market's doing. The market's been on an uptick for a number of years now, but what happens if a 2008 happens? If already with this study that we're finding out that a lot of Americans don't have enough income to last them through retirement, then that's going to be problematic. So it's important to look at, as part of your retirement plan, and again, we think there's 5 pieces to a sound retirement game plan: having a tax plan, as we've talked about already on the show, a legacy plan, we've talked a little bit about, leaving maybe instead of tax-deferred money to the next generation, maybe we leave tax-free money, having a health care plan, how are we going to plan for long-term care, having an investment plan, making sure our investments match our volatility, but really probably the most important, the one that's going to really build that foundation in retirement, is having an income plan. So ask yourself, what is your income plan that you have that's going to take you through the rest of your life? And with different families, there's different ways that can be set up. I just working with a family. We're meeting again next week, and we're putting together really a strategy. They just recently retired. We've talked about delaying taking Social Security, so they have an income gap they know that they have to cover. So one of the things we're doing is we're putting together a drawdown strategy because they've done a great job of accumulating wealth. Now they're switching on into a different part of the money cycle. Now they're switching into preservation and distribution of that money. And it's a completely different skill set. Accumulating wealth is very different than preserving and distributing wealth. And that's really what we're focusing on with them, is we're putting together a drawdown strategy so that from the time that they retire at 62 until age 70, they can allow their Social Security to grow But one of the things they're going to ensure that their income for that period of time is guaranteed, so that no matter how the market does, they're going to be confident that they have enough income to take them to Social Security. And then they have a later bucket of money that's going to take them from 70 and beyond until age 100. So again, it's important to develop that income plan. How are you going to cover your income needs? Are you going to take Social Security right away, or are you going to delay taking Social Security? If you do delay taking Social Security, how are you going to cover that income gap between your guaranteed sources of income, which could be zero, or if you have a pension, it could be a pension. But as you delay taking Social Security, how are you going to draw on your investments to cover that gap? And there's some different strategies and some good ways and probably not so good ways to do it. But it's important to have an intelligent plan. And too often people spend more time planning for a vacation than they plan for the rest of their retirement. So I thought that was an interesting article. The next one is talking about how healthcare costs are exploding. And this was from USA Today, June 2nd. Healthcare cost forced me into bankruptcy. And what we're seeing, and what this article talks about, is a woman who had health insurance and made a good living, but still had to file for bankruptcy to offset the overwhelming medical and long-term care costs she was left with, even after what insurance paid for her and her husband. And this is one of the big things that we're spending a lot of time talking to our clients about, is just the growing cost of long-term care. Right now, if you were to need a nursing home, that's going to run you about $8,000 to $12,000 a month in Michigan. So the question is, how are you going to go about paying for that? And that's something that we cover in our workshops. And we have some workshops coming up in Ann Arbor, Bloomfield Hills, Brighton, and Livonia. And you can go to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, to see a list of our upcoming workshops. And then another article I saw, this was from Financial Advisor magazine, June 13th, 2019, why millennials might not see much of the $30 trillion wealth transfer. So they talked about this big wealth transfer coming, where it was once thought that millennials would inherit an enormous amount of wealth from their parents and grandparents. But that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. First of all, with the tax laws changing, like the Secure Act, which we talked about, it's putting more taxes are going to have to be paid for our beneficiaries. Second big concern, why this wealth transfer may not occur, is due to the volatility and possible market crash that a lot of people think are coming down the pike. And then the third one is just the increased healthcare costs. Add these three things together, and it looks like that the millennials who might be counting on this money might not necessarily see as much as they were planning on due to these issues. So they need to take more responsibility for their own actions, look at ways to save, again, look at Roth or tax-free options to grow that money. So I hope you enjoyed the show this week. We have a lot of workshops coming up in the next couple months during the summer, so school is not out here. Visit our website to learn more about our workshops. Take care.
Learn more about Chris Berry and how he can help your family by visiting online at thechrisberryshow.com. That's thechrisberryshow.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 810-355-2584. That's 810-355-2584. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the Elder Care Firm, AE Wealth Management, or the CJ Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There is no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.